Could all be here today for the Canadian Crew Chapter's Fireside Chat with Sonny Kalsi, CEO of BentallGreenOak. I'm Lauren MacKinnon, Director of Stakeholder Relations with Crew Vancouver and COO of Glotman Simpson, a North American structural engineering firm. Hailing from over here on the West Coast with Crew Vancouver, I'm extremely pleased at how well our Canadian Crew Chapters have come together this past year to collaborate. This is our second of more to come collaborative events we have this year to do, and it couldn't be possible without our amazing sponsors of each chapter. So I just want to take a quick moment to recognize our fantastic top tier sponsors. So here's our network of Canadian Crew chapters, and for Crew Vancouver, a special thank you to our top tier sponsors. For Crew Calgary, very much thank you. Crew Edmonton, Crew Saskatoon, Toronto Crew, Crew Montreal, and a big thank you to Crew Nova Scotia sponsors. Now on to the main event today. Leading us in today's fireside chat is Farrah Khimji. Farrah is the founder of Futura Funds and president for Toronto Crew. Farrah's passion and purpose is to be an ambassador in the commercial real estate industry, one that advocates for progress, champions change, and challenges the status quo. She works with both technology startups and corporate clients to develop strategies and best practices on how to integrate technology and innovation into the commercial real estate industry using a collaborative approach. Having worked in the industry in an investment, development, and finance capacity for 15 years to now working closely with innovative technology companies, Farrah understands both parties and strives to find ways to collaborate and move forward. She believes that technology and innovation will be instrumental in the industry's ability to continue to drive growth and unlock value from its assets. Farrah also understands the importance of diversity when it comes to innovation for the built world and how diversity of thought, background, ethnicity, age, and gender are so integral in building bright, inclusive, and prosperous communities globally. Making her a very fitting person to lead us in today's discussion. Over to you, Farrah.
Thank you, Lauren, for that introduction. Before we dive in, I'd like to share that while today is a fireside chat format, we do encourage audience participation throughout, and I'm going to do my best to address any questions as they come in over the course of the hour, in addition to at the end. So feel free to send them over through the Q&A feature. So I would now like to take the opportunity to introduce our guest speaker for today, Sonny Kalsi. Sonny is the CEO of BentallGreenOak and is based in New York City. BGO is a global real estate investment and management platform with approximately $50 billion under management. BGO has 24 offices worldwide and over 1,300 employees. The firm manages investment strategies and properties in various asset and risk classes. Sonny previously was a founder of GreenOak Real Estate in 2010, and together with the team grew the business organically to $12 billion of assets under management in 10 countries with over 100 employees. Before GreenOak, Sonny was global co-head of Morgan Stanley's real estate investing business and president of the Morgan Stanley Real Estate Funds until 2009. At its peak, the platform had approximately $100 billion of assets under management in 33 countries. Sonny, from that bio, it's very evident that you have accomplished a lot and are currently leading one of the largest global real estate companies. I'd love for you to walk us through your journey and take us back to the beginning. I'd be curious to know, what were you like as a kid, and if real estate was always the plan?
Farrah, thank you so much for having me today. And I feel like I have to give everyone a disclaimer about the sunglasses real fast. So I had to have emergency eye surgery last week for a torn retina. And so my eyes good news is they're recovering, but the bad news is that Zoom is looking at a screen is not easy on them. So I apologize, I have the sunglasses on. This is not my normal look. The alternative is an eye patch, and I will tell you that it's, given Halloween is a few weeks ago now, this is a much worse option. So, so first of all, thank you again for having me today. I'm really, looking forward to chatting with you all. So look, background-wise, my family is immigrated from India. By way of the UK, we came to the US when I was very young. My dad's a retired nuclear engineer. My mom was a homemaker, but also actually a bit of an entrepreneur. So I didn't grow up in a real estate background at all. So I did not grow up. I grew up until I was in high school thinking I was going to be the first Indian descent linebacker in the NFL. And then I realized I wasn't that good. So, I went to university in Washington, D.C. at Georgetown University. But I don't come from a real estate background. Right? I came, but and I think my parents have now forgiven me because, like many South Asian immigrant parents, they wanted me to become a doctor or an engineer or a lawyer, and I definitely let them down on all those fronts.
Okay. And so what did you end up going to school for?
So when I went to school, again, back to my parents, they insisted I study something that was tangible in their view, right? I wanted to be a history major. My dad did not feel that history was tangible enough. So I majored in finance and accounting, and which was, great to study. Look, I would say I think about the world in which people operate in now, as people are students or earlier in their career, things are much more competitive now than they were in the late 80s and early 90s. So I could be completely clueless, have no idea what I wanted to do, have not even heard of what an investment bank was until my junior year of university, and still was able to get a job at an investment bank. That's not possible anymore.
Yeah. And so from university, you started at the investment bank. So give us sort of your path from right out of university up until founding GreenOak.
Yeah, sure. So I came out of university in 1990. It was the middle of a recession, big, global recession. The U.S. in particular was hit very hard, not dissimilar from where we are today. Obviously, the driver was not a pandemic. So I was happy to get a job at all. I started working for a firm called Payne Weber, which is now part of UBS. I worked in the mergers and acquisitions department. I did that for a year. It was not a firm I was excited to be at. And then I got an opportunity to go to Morgan Stanley, but the job offer was to go to real estate. And I said, don't know anything about real estate. I met a few people in the group. I liked them. There are a lot of characters. One of the things I've liked about the industry for my almost 30 years now. And so I took the job and I thought I'd be there for a year or two. And I ended up being there for 18 years, including ended up helping helped run the real estate business globally. So I always say it's indicative of, I think one of the things I always encourage people to do is be open-minded about their careers. And I was definitely open-minded. In my 18 years at Morgan Stanley, I only worked in New York 5 years. It was really the first couple and the last couple. And in the middle, I worked in California, Europe, Australia, and then a few places in Asia, including in total 10 years in Asia. And so I would say if I think about my career, I probably think the single biggest thing that I know there are a few people on from BentallGreenOak, or BGO as we call it, and they know one of my favorite sayings is to tell people to start with the S. I've tried to embody starting with the S in my career. So when they asked me to move to these different places, I said, sure. I took it as an adventure and something different. And I think in hindsight, it was probably one of the best decisions I could have made. Came back to the US, was asked to come back to the US to help take over the global business in the fall of 2006, which in hindsight is like being asked to help take over the helm of the Titanic after it hit the iceberg, but no one knew it yet. And I found myself a couple of years later out of a job because I think when the environment and where things were, the financial crisis, a lot of big firms made a lot of changes, and I was part of those changes. So I was 41 years old and had really only had one job my entire life, and it was first time I'd been fired, and I had to really think about what I was going to do next. And that's where GreenOak came. I think a number of my former colleagues reached out, and I think there was just a point of view that as 2009, right, that we're at the bottom of the cycle. There should be some really interesting, attractive opportunities to grow a new business. And, I'm not sure I'd recommend it to everyone. We took the risk and took the leap, and that ended up being GreenOak.
Wow, it's quite the journey. I myself have gone out and started my own business, so I'm only a year and a half into it, but I can relate to those early days. And I think it takes a lot of guts, so to say, to do what you did. Obviously, you're very successful at it to the point that it attracted the eyes of Bentall Kennedy. So I'm sure the audience would be really curious to know a little bit more about the merger between Bentall Kennedy and GreenOak, from your perspective.
Yeah, sure. So I think, it's like a lot of things in life. I think it's really hard to separate the personal and the professional. I think things are very interactive. I always say to people, you're never going to be happy personally unless you're at least got some degree of happiness professionally, and vice versa, right? And so I say that in that, there are three of us that founded GreenOak. At the end of 2016, one of my partners came to us, and because of some stuff going on in his personal life, he needed some liquidity. And so we started having some discussions with people. And originally the thought was to sell a small interest, a minority interest in the company. And as that word got out, we then started getting calls from people who wanted to do more than buy a minority interest, including a very big global asset management firm. And we spent some time with them, and it just wasn't the right fit for us. It wasn't the right cultural fit or anything else. And then we got a call from Bentall Kennedy, but we got a call from Amy Price. Amy and I had, and a number of my former colleagues from Morgan Stanley, we'd all worked together with Amy back to 1993. So she had joined Morgan Stanley. So we'd all known each other a long time. We were personal friends in addition to being professional, being friendly professionally. And she had an interesting proposition where she just thought that the two businesses could fit really well together. And that started a 1.5-year courting process to get to know each other better and, get to know Sun Life, who's obviously, the majority shareholder of the business. And it was just right. It just felt right. Most importantly, the people part of it felt right. The cultural part was close enough, meaning, and I say that because, if you have a 100-year-old business like Sun Life, like Bentall Kennedy with a 150-year-old insurance company as their shareholder, that's going to be one degree of culture, which was great, very institutionally focused, client focused, et cetera. I think we had at that time, 7 or 8-year-old company, but, with a bunch of people that have been working together for 25 plus years. We're more entrepreneurial, but, a lot of the ethos there were very comparable in terms of, commitment to our clients, the commitment to our team, wanting to not only be good investors, but do things the right way. And so we're really, and the way also the business fit together was really interesting, right? The GreenOak business was a global business, equally important operations in Europe and Asia to what we had at the time at the US only, and more high return strategies, value add, opportunistic, on the equity side at least. And then, Bentall Kennedy was, really primarily almost exclusively focused on core, and really in North America, in the US and Canada. And so the two businesses fit well together. So in addition to the people kind of liking each other and having a good cultural and social fit, the businesses fit well together. And then to me, the clincher was, I was personally insistent that if we were going to do this, that Amy was going to become president. And so she will become president on Jan 1, 2021, which I'm very excited about.
Which is great, and actually kind of leads very well into our conversation today. And before we get right into it, I did want to ask you, given the topic that we're chatting about today, I'd like to know how you would describe your experience of working in commercial real estate as a person of Indian descent and a visible minority for much of your career.
Yeah.
Did you face challenges throughout that journey?
So Farrah, I think it's some of it's, my answer is a little bit relative. The simple answer is yes. When I grew up in the South, so I grew up in Tennessee. So growing up in Tennessee, you actually, especially in the 80s, I experienced racism all the time, right? And so I hate to say it, but I'll just say it bluntly, you kind of got used to it. and you kind of expected it a little bit, right? In a weird kind of way, especially back then, especially back in the South, southern part of the US. So when I got to university, it was much better. When I then started working on Wall Street, I was just really happy to be there, to be quite honest. And, so even though I'm a visible minority, I go by Sonny, I don't go by Khimji Singh, which is my full name. And as I've said to you before, I think one of the things I was able to do is assimilate as much as possible. It was easier for me to do that than it would be for maybe some other minorities, for sure, than I think it would have been for women that I worked with at the time. But I definitely had to assimilate, right? And so I knew that I always took the perspective, and I knew it, that I just had to work harder and try harder to get to the same place. And look, I think that can I tell you that I feel like I faced overt racism? I'm not sure, but I do know that I didn't have either the background or the connections. And I also oftentimes felt like I wasn't in the inner circle, if you will, at least early in my career. And that was just something that I, again, partly because of my background and coming from the South, I just kind of accepted it as reality, and I just put my head down and tried to get through it.
So that's really interesting, because it sounds like you said, look, this is the cards I've been dealt. I'm going to assimilate. I'm going to make the best of this. I'm happy to be here. And then now, flash forward just a couple months ago, you were interviewed by PERE magazine, and you shared that a very bold vision, or what some would say is a very bold vision and target for BGO. And more specifically, you stated that 66.7% of all incoming hires will be minorities or women going forward at BGO. So what led you to making that kind of statement, and why 66.7%?
Yeah. So first of all, I'm not that 22-year-old anymore that came out of school in 1990 and basically said, I'm just going to do whatever I got to do and assimilate to get ahead. I'm 52, pushing 53, and just have a lot of different perspectives. So one, if I look back, it's too bad that I felt like I had to assimilate to get ahead. And I want to make sure, I don't want people to feel like they need to do that. I don't think it's appropriate. I definitely don't want anyone at BGO to feel like they have to do that to get ahead. I want us to be able to celebrate people's differences. And actually, I view that's a huge asset, and it's a very positive thing. I think diversity of thought and diversity of perspective is super critical. And I think as an investor in real estate and as a manager of real estate, I think it makes us better. So, and that's something I've thought for a long time, and been involved in a number of things within the real estate industry, but also within the companies that I used to control and manage to do that. And then at the beginning of the summer, George Floyd gets murdered in the U.S., and I think it just raises huge national consciousness, not just in the U.S., but certainly in North America, definitely in parts of the world. And I think a lot of people just said enough. Right? This is just enough. And we need to stop just talking about making change, and people need to do tangible things. So for me, I'd say it's a couple of things. One is, I think if you're in the real estate business, regardless of what part of the business you're in the advisory brokerage side, or if you're in the consulting side, or if you're in the investment side or the management side, it is inherently a quantitative business, right? So we're an investor in real estate. If we were to say, I want to buy that asset because it's really pretty and shiny and it looks nice and we think it'll make us feel good to own it, okay, that's fine. But if we're not talking about return on cost and what the internal rate of return will be and whatever else, it's a quantitative business, right? So for us to try to approach issues of diversity and inclusion and not have a quantitative element to them, to me just doesn't, it feels like we're not, my concern would be is that we are saying all the right things, we're saying all the right platitudes, but how do we know that we're going to be able to measure up to that? Are we really delivering on what we're saying? So that was part of it. And then I think the 2/3 of the 66.7%, Farrah, as you said, it was, some people think it's really revolutionary. I think it's just math, right? I mean, I think So if and I know the data hold for the US, and I think it's pretty similar for Canada, but in the United States of America, 50% of the population, I know this is true in Canada as well, are women, right? So I think if we said instead half the people we hire going forward are going to be women, that's not controversial at all. It's long overdue, but it's not controversial, right? Also in the US, 40% of the population are minorities. So 60% are white, 40% are minorities, right? So if we did the math there and said, look, we'd like to say all of our new hiring going forward are going to equally take from different parts of the population. Say a different way, the people we hire, we want them to be reflective of the society at large in which we operate. That's where the 2/3 comes from, right? And so to me, it's not revolutionary at all. It's just math. I get that it's not the way things have gone, generally speaking, in the industry historically. It's not BGO historically. I think, but I think it's an opportunity. I think it's a big opportunity. I think it's something that's very actionable. And it's a small part of everything we need to do. But I think it's clearly the one I think that got a lot of the eyeballs, no pun intended, but it got a lot of the attention because it's a tangible metric and it's not just happy talk.
Yeah. And I think what's interesting too is, you could look at different industries and say, okay, you could say the same thing for other industries, but for me personally, I feel like real estate is the one industry that really should be representative, because we literally serve communities and build communities for where people live and work and all the good stuff that we do, that it just makes sense, right, to have the people who are building those communities and serving those communities represent the communities themselves. So I love it, and I think it's setting a precedent, and it's setting a tone for our industry going forward. So I'm going to ask you first, when you put that statement out, how was that really met, internally at BGO?
Yeah. Look, I think broadly speaking, I think people are very supportive of it, right? I think I would say there's there's been a specific reaction within the company, but then I would say there's a broader reaction. The specific reaction is, if I'm a white male, do I need to worry, right? Does this mean that that I should be concerned and that my opportunities are going to be limited? And look, I've said, look, I don't believe that you can get to inclusion by excluding people. Like, that to me is not the right way to do this, right? So, and I've always said it to myself personally. Almost every opportunity I was given professionally in my career was given to me by a white male, because that's generally who ran the show, so wherever I worked. And I've always been incredibly appreciative of that. Actually, the majority of my closest friends are white men. So I think that whether someone works at BGO or not, that's not an issue whatsoever. We are a merit-based organization. We will always be a merit-based organization. And so I don't believe inclusion, again, should be, be measured by the exclusion of others. The broader industry reaction has been, that's great, but is there really anyone to hire out there, right? And I said this in the article, I think that's a lazy argument. I think that the system is set up in a way where people that come from certain backgrounds and have certain experiences are more likely to be candidates for certain positions, right? Like you asked me before, I had no real estate background at all. I had it was by pure luck that I wound up in the real estate industry, right? And so I think that my view is there are lots of qualified women. There are lots of qualified minorities, and we just need to work to find them. And we'll get to what we need to do once we find them, but we got to work to find them. And yeah, does that take a little bit more work? Yeah, it does. But I think that it should impact how we think about recruiting. When we think about it, when we call it at BGOs, we call it EDI, equity, diversity, and inclusion. I think the E is important. The equity part of this is, and I'm going to make a broad generalization. Some of the people we hire, I think everyone's going to be as capable, some people might not have as much of a background, right? And they might not have the mentorship network or some of the other stuff. I think that's where the equity part kicks in. I think that's where we have to say, we think this person could be really a very talented person. This could be someone who could be very successful in our organization, and we're going to help provide the tools for them to be successful. That to me is the equity part, right? So we'll see. Look, if there's if this falls on its face, it will be because we can't find the candidates. I am willing to, I've already staked my reputation to it. I'd be willing to stake a lot of money to it, that I believe that not only are the candidates out there, but that, I hope by us making a statement like this, that they will reach out to us as much as we're trying to reach out to them.
Amazing. We actually had a question come in that sort of touched on some of what you said, and maybe you can go a little further, but so, although specific groups such as minorities and women may currently be underrepresented in the field, wondering why BentallGreenOak would not consider hiring new employees based on merit first, gender-based and minority status second, or better yet, why not have all employment applications be submitted without names so that the most qualified person is hired for a job? Would that not be the most fair or equitable way to hire? So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, look, I think on I guess I'd split the two of them up, right? The two parts of that up. I think on the first part, I just don't. I think to me, what's implied in that question is, if we are trying to hire a more diverse group of people, are we going to be sacrificing something, right, in terms of quality? I just don't fundamentally believe that's the case. It's actually not been my personal experience in the course of my career. I like to believe that I'm an example of that not being the case. I like to believe Amy Price, who's our president, being an example of that. And then on the latter, look, I will tell you this. Look, I think that I don't believe hiring is about taking a group of individuals and thinking about them in isolation. I really believe that building a team and building a culture is all about how does that group work together, right? And I think that, I think in part of that ecosystem that you're trying to create, and by the way, culture is not something, culture in my team gets, I say this all the time, so whoever's on will smirk at this. I don't believe culture is a photograph. I think it's a moving picture, because it's always evolving, it's always changing. But a big component of culture are who are the people. And I really do believe that if we have a more diverse team, for people that not just gender, not just ethnicity, but also experiences, socioeconomic backgrounds, all that. People bring different things with them and different experiences. I think the net result of that is a more powerful combination, and we get to a better outcome, right? So look, if we only had to hire 3 people, and we only needed 3 people to do what we do, right? If we're the Toronto Raptors, right? So they have 12 people, right? Yes, the Toronto Raptors probably should not be trying to figure out how to have the most diverse team they need to get the best athletes they can get on the playing field. I really believe, look, we have 1,300 people. Our goal of getting 1,300 athletes who can work together and all that, I think having the combination of experiences and background is super critical to us getting a much better outcome, right?
And I would even argue for the Raptors, like, you don't want 12 shooting guards. You need
Right.
You need people with different skill sets to come together and really make that team succeed. And I've found, when I've worked on teams that are multidisciplinary, intergenerational, diverse, it's far more exciting and likely even more productive than a team of 12 John Smiths, right? So I think we all know, and we've experienced both types of teams, many of us throughout our careers. So I agree. It's about being intentional about rounding out that team and being inclusive and bringing on the right people. So with that, now that the statement is out there, you've set this target. What are BGO's plans? You and I chatted a little bit prior to this, and you mentioned that there are 3 key stools that play a factor in meeting these targets. So recruiting, retaining, and mentoring. So let's delve into each each one now?
Yeah. So I would say, the way, Farrah, I think about it is you have a stool, there's just 3 legs, right? There's 3 legs and they all have to be equal, right? So number 1 is recruiting, right? We've talked a lot about that, right? So we need to be more diverse in our recruiting. We need to dig deeper. We need to think broader. And we also need to not just think about what that person can deliver on day 1, but what can that person deliver in 2 or 3 or 4 years time once we give them an opportunity to grow and be part of our team. So then number 2 is retain, right? And that we have a lot of work to do on that front. And we're doing a lot of work on that. So, we need to create an environment in which this diverse group of people feel like their voices are heard, they have a real seat at the table, and that people care about their careers, right? And that cuts into mentorship a little bit, but just if I just stay on the retain. So since this is crew, I'll give you a very specific example. When I started working on Wall Street, I would say about 40% of my incoming class that I was with, and this is 30 years ago, were women, right? And then a few years later, I became an associate and a new group of people came in, and I would say probably 25% of that group were women. If I looked forward 5, 6, 7, 8 years after that, a big percentage of the women had dropped out. And I think for a lot of different reasons, but one of which were, I think women have, and again, risky for me to say this on a group call with a bunch of women, but at least historically, and the way, for example, women have played a disproportionate role from a childcare perspective, right? And I think, and so I think a lot of things have happened that have made it harder for women to stay active historically in the workforce. So what are things that we can do about that? Having much more progressive maternity and paternity leave policies are things that we can do. That's something we're spending a lot of time on because it's tangible. By the way, it's back to my quantitative point versus qualitative, right? We want to have more progressive approaches to maternity and paternity policy. Great. What are they, right? We're not done. We're working on that, right? So that's part of the retain. Part of the retain is having people feel like we celebrate their differences. We give them a voice. So we've created, over the course of this year, we created a number of affinity groups to basically give a voice, because sometimes it's hard to be the one voice alone, but sometimes when you're in a group, so whether it's our affinity group for our Black employees, our Asian employees, our LGBTQ plus employees, we've also got a senior women leadership group that's chaired by Amy. To start with the senior women in our organization, of which we actually have a number in Canada, which is awesome. And so I think a lot of that to me goes back to the retention part. And then I think the mentorship part, I would actually argue that's one of the hardest ones, right? I think one of the simplest things about mentorship is you want to be able to look to your mentor, and in a perfect world, you see someone that is a mirror back on you, right? Someone that looks like you, comes from your background and all of that. I didn't really have that in my career, right? And so now, fortunately, as I said before, I was really lucky, and I got a lot of, and continue to actually get some great mentorship from a number of people. But in my case, it's been predominantly white men, which has been great. By the way, they're a big part of the solution here, right? And so, but I think that mentorship is really critical, right? So we need to champion a more diverse group, because as we continue to bring people in, we can create mentorship opportunities for them, from people that, again, that they're going to feel more comfortable with and have more similar backgrounds with. That takes time. I think external mentorship opportunities are super critical, like crew, right? I think that, because I will say there's a lot you can get from internal mentors, but it's also really powerful, I think, to be able to get mentorship opportunities from external sources. Sometimes it's great to get mentorship from someone that's not your boss or in your chain of command or whatever else. So all of that is, I would say, still very much work in progress for us. Look, we've actually put a lot of energy into this. We hired Korn Ferry to help us. We interviewed a number of firms. We thought Korn Ferry had the most interesting practice and the deepest practice, and a very diverse team on top of that. So we like that. And so Korn Ferry's been working closely with us. We have a head of EDI who reports to the C-suite. that we put into place this year. Anna Murray is our head of ESG. A big part of, I think, with ESG, E or sustainability or environment has been the main focus for the last 5 years. I personally think the next 5 years is all going to be about the S or social. And so I think that there's a lot of opportunity here, but it's going to take a lot. This is going to be a lot of hard work, and there will be naysayers. And so we need to fundamentally believe that this is critical to the future of our company and to our industry, which I do, and I believe our senior management does as well.
Thank you. There's a lot in there, and I've got a 3 follow-ups to some of what you just shared, but one was a specific question that came in from the audience and someone who works at BGO. So Julie Zhang has said, BGO is minority. She said she's a BGO minority female employee here. Thank you, Sonny, for being a champion for us. Will the company do more to keep the female employees once they are hired? So you did touch on that. Is the maternity leave policy still on track to be rolled out next year?
Yes, it is. We're negotiating right now, basically negotiating to make it more generous. Farrah, as I mentioned to you, I'll tell you the model I love the most. We're not going to get all the way there, but the model I love the most is in Norway. So Norway has the most progressive maternity leave policy I've ever heard of. They give mom gets a year. You get a full year, which is awesome. And then there's a second year, but the second year goes to dad or to the other. Actually, it's 2020, so I can't use mom and dad anymore. I'll use spouse. I'll use parent 1 and parent 2, right? So parent 1 gets the first year and parent 2 gets the next year, right? I'm not sure we're going to get all the way there, but I think that I do believe that what we will see increasingly in our industry and globally is just best practice in a lot of these fronts. And I do believe that in addition to mentorship, one of the very tangible things we can do is have a much more progressive paternity leave policy to help people stay in the workforce longer and not make some of these decisions become binary decisions.
Thank you. Yeah, my next thing is a comment. You mentioned Korn Ferry, and I think it's so important for any organizations out there that are starting on this work to track and measure and get the data. Like you said, you cannot, and we do it in every other part of our business. So if you have tangible goals that you want to reach, you got to know what your baseline is. Crew Network has done a survey across North America. They had a specific Canadian study as well to sort of benchmark, metrics around diversity and specifically around women in our industry. But I think it's really important that we now start tracking that. And here in Canada, I know it's different in the States, but there isn't race-based data that's collected on employees. But I do believe that that's inherent in the US structure. That's correct, right?
Yeah, that's right. And actually it was news to me, right? So when when we started really, and this actually goes back to last year because we were really focused on this, before kind of the consciousness got raised even more this year. I was surprised to hear that data is not tracked in Canada. And I view Canada as so much more progressive and open-minded than the US, to be honest with you. And so to me, it was just a surprise. Like in the US, we know the ethnic and gender background of every one of our employees, right? And so we're actually going through the process right now. It's voluntary, but people are participating, broadly speaking, of trying to figure out what that is. Because if we don't know what our baseline is, we don't know how to measure improvement against that baseline, right? And so we're doing that work right now. So it was definitely a surprise to me, all right, to find that out. But that's, look, all good. Look, and I think that, and I agree with you 100%, Farrah, we have to get that data as a baseline. We have to understand that. And then we got to be willing to work with each other to share data, and then to also kind of hold each other to task a little bit from the standpoint of, are we doing better?
Agreed. And you have to walk before you run, right? Like get things right. And so the other comment I had is, for me, from a mentoring perspective, I remember in my early career, I didn't really have those mentors. There were some females within, the first job that I had, female partners that I looked up to, and I thought, oh my gosh, this is someone I can see myself represented, and I'd love for that woman to be a mentor to me. And that it wasn't forthcoming. And then when I got into the real estate industry, all the senior people were typically white males. And then I joined Crew, right? I joined Crew in 2013, and it was a game changer. And so this is not just meant to be a plug for Crew, but for a lot of you joining, if you're early in your career, like those examples of the female leaders, they're there for you, right? Like this is just as much as we're looking for men to support and mentor and sponsor us as women really need to be, sponsors and mentors to each other. And Crew does such a great job of fostering that environment. I myself have turned from, mentee to mentor over those years, and it's been so rewarding. So I just encourage everyone to remember that and the part that we have to play in changing the narrative as well. I want to move on, and somewhat in that vein, many women often feel that there's a glass ceiling, so to say, a point at which they cannot continue to advance their career to the most sort of senior leadership positions. Although with the most recent election in the US, many would just say that ceiling was shattered. And what are your thoughts on this? And, why does representation matter?
Well, I try to keep. I'm going to try to keep myself apolitical, although my colors start showing very quickly. I will say that I said on Saturday night when Kamala Harris gave her speech, I was sitting there crying the entire time, right? Because it was just, like being of South Asian descent, it was just awesome, right? And I looked at her and I saw my daughter, my sister, right? Just a bunch of people who are really, just from a, it just was just awesome. There's tears of joy, right? So I am, so look, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done, but I think that people need role models, right? Whether it's in mentorship or anything else. So I believe there have been glass ceilings in place. I think they've been in place for women. I think they've been in place for minorities. I am a eternal optimist, and I really do believe that I feel like there's a huge amount of tailwind right now for change, and for change that's going to be lasting. And just as important as it is to see Senator Harris become our vice president-elect, and I hope our next president, I think it's also really important for people to see, women and minorities get into other positions of leadership, and then use that as an opportunity to try to expand the opportunity set and be more inclusionary. Look, that all being said, Farrah, it's also got to be important to the majority, right? We'll never see change unless it's important to the majority. And again, you asked me what the reaction's been at BGO, but I'd say more broadly, I've been really positively, the reaction's been very positive, right, to some of the stuff that we've been saying and doing. And I really do believe that even if someone themselves is not a woman or a minority, they have children, they have spouses, they have, other family members, et cetera. And I think that all of us want to see, an environment in which, even if it's not themselves personally, an environment in which there's opportunity for more people, right? So, anyways, look, I got a little bit teary-eyed again thinking about that speech. It was awesome. So it was awesome.
Yeah, that speech, I think, I'm sure most people on this call have watched it. I've watched it a couple times, teared up every time. And what was amazing, I was visiting my parents that weekend, and my mom, who's, Indian herself, was bawling, right? It just was such a moment for people to see themselves represented on a world stage, right? I know it's the US, but it's a world stage, right? So her platform will become a global platform. And that to me is probably one of the most inspiring things, just as Crew has been, right? Seeing the women around us doing great things, it's really inspiring. So I'd like to ask you, I think a lot of people are saying, okay, it's great, BGO, it's so amazing to see BGO step out as a leader in sort of advancing diversity in our industry. what can other leaders do? And what can we do as individual employees or entrepreneurs?
Yeah. So I'd say a couple things. One, look, I think we're inherently, to be in this business, you have to be inherently competitive, right? And so, we want to win. This would be one category where I'd be happy to lose. Meaning, if other people say, "Hey, we see what you're trying to do, BGO, and we can do even better. We can be even more diverse, or we can make it happen even faster, or we can, we're going to do the following from a retention standpoint, or the following from a mentorship perspective." That's awesome. So if we don't end up winning, I want us to win, but it's one of those things where I'd be happy not to be the winner, if that makes any sense, in a weird kind of way. Someone said to me the other day, I was back and forth with someone. They wanted me to participate in something. I wasn't able to do it. And they said, "Well, we just want you to know, the three of us, our companies have talked about it, and we're going to take on the Kalsi Diversity Challenge, a little bit like the Ice Bucket Challenge from a few years ago, where everyone poured buckets of whatever." I'd never intended this to be a Kalsi Diversity Challenge, but honestly, if people are going to rally behind this, and other companies say, "This is awesome, and we want to do something similar, different, whatever, but all in the right direction," awesome. I think in terms of what people can do, vote with your feet, right? Work at companies that you think are not only saying the type of things that you think are important to you, but actually doing them. Press your own companies to do more of the same. I think you'll be surprised at how much of a willing ear you will find these days. It's a complete anecdote, but when we were when George Floyd got murdered, we were immediately like trying to think, okay, we need to do or say something. And actually, our CFO, Richard Cross, who's a white male, based in Toronto, was the first person to reach out to me and was like really forceful. "We got to say something. We got to take a stand. We got to be really." And I remember the whole debate became, I wanted to put on my posting, which I think was on LinkedIn or Twitter or whatever, the hashtag that Black Lives Matter. And there was definitely some concern about that. And gee, how are people going to react to that? And while we were having that debate, all of which happened in the course of hours, so this is not something that's gone on over days, Dean Connor, who's the CEO of Sun Life, who's obviously our majority shareholder, put out his statement, and he hashtagged the end of it, Black Lives Matter. Dean's a awesome person and a great business leader in Canada. He's also a white male. And so I use that for, first of all, my tweet went out right after his. But I think that to me, it's indicative of how there's a real desire at the top of a lot of different organizations to see real change, sustained change, diversity, inclusion. And I would say if you find yourself in an organization that is not open to that, even after pressing them, I would take a big step back and just think, is that the place where you want to be?
I agree wholeheartedly. I think it's really important to work at a place where your values align. And we're in real estate again, we build communities, communities that include Black people, that include minorities, that include women. And so we need to look to these companies to be the voice, to take a stance, to put out that communication. And I'm so glad that he did, and that you followed with that, because I think a lot of people stay out of the conversation sometimes to not be political, right? They kind of say,
Yep.
I don't want, but if these are your values and you truly believe them, then anyone who agrees that that wasn't the right stance, like, is that really people who you want to do business with anyways in the long term? Like, if someone's going to take real offense to what you've shared, then maybe that's a questioning of that as well, like, right? So I think it's I'm glad that
I would just say it's 2020, right? So in a different era, different time, it's 2020, and things are like, whether it's Kamala Harris or other leaders, from a political perspective. Look, I will say this. I believe in the last 4 years in the United States, certain parts of government, especially the federal government, has abdicated its responsibility on a lot of topics, whether it's inclusion, whether race relations, whether it's the environment. And what has happened is you've seen the private sector step up significantly, right? So you've seen major, when the US pulled out of the Paris Climate Accord, you saw a number of companies come forward and say, we're going to follow it ourselves, or local municipalities. When we saw some of what was not, I think the reason that, again, from a US and also Canadian perspective, you had so many companies come forward in the beginning of the summer with positive, supportive statements about race relations and social justice, is because they know it's critically important, right? It's not only in the culture of their companies and what they stand for, but they know it's important to their employees, right? And I think it's also, look, we manage 50 billion US dollars of capital for other people. It's important to our investors, right? So even, I would say, even if I believe it's all the right thing to do, it's also the right business thing to do, to be quite honest with you.
Yeah.
Right? And that's going to become increasingly apparent.
Yeah, whether it's morally or the business case is clearly there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'd like to transition as we kind of cap off here and, pick your brain a bit now, moving a little away from this topic, but I always look to the leaders in our industry to kind of understand a path forward. And, given our current climate, there's so much that's changing in our industry right now as we speak. COVID was, a massive sort of disruptor for the business. I'd like to know, how are you and BGO approaching these changes and challenges?
So I would say, look, from a climate perspective, and I can take zero credit for this because it really comes from the Bentall side of the firm before we merged. Bentall has been a market leader in ESG for a long time. From Anna Murray, who is our global head of ESG, she and her team working with the teams broadly, I think our Prime in Canada and then our open-end core fund in the US have been marked, number 1 or 2 ranked for 10 years in a row, right? So I think it's been, I would say Bentall has been an early adopter to the importance of sustainability. And I think it's something that we can't rest on our laurels. And I think it's something that we need to continue to press going forward. And I'm really glad, by the way, to see other people that it's important to them. I think it is the biggest, look, I believe we're going in the right direction. We'll continue to go to the right direction from an equity, diversity, and inclusion perspective. I just fundamentally believe that, right? I think climate change is the other biggest risk that we've got. I think that I think future generations are going to, if we don't get on this now, future generations are going to look at us and say, what the heck were you people doing, right? And real estate's can be a big part of the problem. It is. It can be a big part of the solution. And I really believe that we have an opportunity as an industry to be a big part of the solution. And look, technology is a big part of that. I get asked by young people all the time, if I were 22 again, what would I be focused on if I were going to do real estate? I tell them all, focus on the technology side of the business. And it doesn't have to be, you don't have to write code. I don't even know what code is, but just get focused on the side of it that it has to do with, dynamic change and the application of what I would say 21st century technology as opposed to the 19th century way of looking at things. And there's a huge opportunity there. I think our industry, I can use a baseball analogy in Canada because we both know the sport. But I think we're in the early innings of technological disruption for the real estate industry. And you can look at other industries that have been so significantly disrupted in such a short period of time that I think it's a big opportunity. I also believe in a lot of ways technology is a great equalizer, and I think in an indirect way does a great job on the diversity inclusion perspective, right?
It's really funny because everything you've just said is very affirming to me because the whole business of Futura funds was based on that, seeing the opportunity that is there for technological advancement in our industry and better innovation, but doing it in an inclusive, equitable way, right? And so, I agree with you on that 100%. And it's very affirming to me that you believe that that would be the career choice you would have chosen. So
Yeah.
I feel like I'm on a good path. One last question, and I think this would be a good one for everyone. What do you think will be the most important leadership traits that professionals in our industry will need to embody going forward?
Yeah. Um, so I think you have to have a certain level of IQ to do the job, right? Yeah, it has to be there. I think the part of the job which has been important historically, but has become even more important going forward, is EQ. I think it's super critically important. Um, and there's a lot that's wrapped up in that, but I think the easy thing to do is to the question that got asked before. The easy thing to do is just go resume blind and hire the people that have the best internships and the best existing career experience and whatever else, and don't try to take the next step. Right? I actually think taking the next step is as much about EQ as it is about anything else. I think EQ is also really critical as it relates to listening to each other. I think it's one of the things that's most disappointing to me about the world right now is that people are doing a lot of talking and not a lot of listening. So I think that's also really critically important. But then the thing I would say I would say this to any group of people I was talking to. I definitely would say it to a group of women in the real estate industry: take control, right? Be proactive, take control. The world is different today and it's getting better all the time, in my view. I'm eternally optimistic about that. And you all are the future. It's your future, right? And I think there are a lot of us that want to work with you to help deliver it the way you would like to see it. So that's what I would say.
Well, thank you, Sonny. I know Lauren's going to pop in now.
Yeah, thank you, Sonny. That was absolutely fantastic. I mean, the takeaways I personally have gotten, and the inspiration from you and BGO, and your efforts for diversity and balancing out our workforce, I think is going to echo throughout the industry. And my hope is that we can. You're the catalyst here, and there's some real change coming for all of us. So thank you again for your insights and everything you're doing, Farrah. Awesome questions that you posed. And thanks everybody for attending today. Again, this is the first of many collaborative crew Canadian chapter events. We look forward to seeing you guys again, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you,
Thanks so much. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.